The atmosphere inside the grand hall was electric, almost suffocating. Cameras flashed from every corner, reporters leaned forward with their pens poised, and the audience sat in a restless hush, knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. The event had been billed as a routine political forum, but everyone could feel it. Something bigger was about to unfold. At the podium stood First Lady Jill Biden, confident, polished, and prepared. Her voice carried the calm assurance of someone used to the spotlight, but beneath it ran a current of steel. She had spoken on education, on leadership, and on the need for fresh vision, her words laced with subtle undertones. But then, with the faintest curl of a smile, she turned her attention toward one man in particular, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. "Senator Kennedy," she began, her tone carefully measured, "your brand of politics might have worked in another era. But let's be honest, clinging to outdated ideas isn't leadership. It's holding this country back." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in closer. Jill's remark wasn't a passing. It was deliberate, sharp, and designed to wound. For the first time in the evening, the air thickened with tension. Kennedy didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Sitting in the front row, his hands rested lightly on the table, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, told a different story, calm, steady, calculating. To the seasoned senator, this wasn't the first time someone had tried to corner him, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the challenge had come from the nation's First Lady herself. The audience waited. Would Kennedy rise to defend himself? Would he strike back immediately or let the insult slide? Every camera lens zoomed in, capturing the tension in high definition. Jill adjusted her papers, emboldened by the silence, and continued with a touch more bite. "Experience is valuable, yes," she said smoothly, "but only if it adapts. Otherwise, it's just a relic of the past, like so many of the ideas you still cling to." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. The crowd shifted again, sensing a confrontation brewing. But Kennedy remained motionless, his expression a mask of calm authority. Only those who truly knew him could see it. The faintest tightening of his jaw, the glimmer of something in his eyes. The room held its breath. A storm was coming. The silence that followed Jill Biden's words was louder than any applause could have been. For a long moment, no one in the hall dared to move. Then, as if on cue, a wave of whispers surged across the audience like wind rippling through tall grass. Reporters leaned closer to their recorders, some already scribbling furiously, while television cameras zoomed in on John Kennedy's face, desperate to capture even the smallest flicker of reaction. But Kennedy sat unmoved, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the podium. He wasn't rattled, at least not outwardly. Jill, however, took his silence as a sign of weakness. Straightening her shoulders, she pressed forward, her tone now sharper, every syllable aimed like a dagger. "You've built your career on old stories and outdated victories," she said, her smile tight but confident. "But the American people aren't interested in yesterday's heroes. They're looking for leaders who understand today, who can speak to the future, not ones who cling to the past like a worn-out textbook. No one reads anymore." Gasps echoed from a section of the audience. The remark had bite, and Jill knew it. She didn't stop there. Her eyes swept the room, then returned to Kennedy. "You call it experience, Senator," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "But let's call it what it is. Stubbornness. You hide behind tradition because it's easier than facing the hard truth that your way of thinking no longer works." The words cut through the hall like a blade. Jill's delivery was smooth, but the sting was undeniable. She wasn't simply critiquing Kennedy's policies. She was questioning his very relevance, his value as a leader. It was a personal strike, bold and deliberate. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few supporters of Jill Biden clapped lightly, though their applause was hesitant, drowned out by the heavy silence that lingered over the majority of the crowd. The cameras captured every angle. Jill's steady posture, Kennedy's unbroken calm, the restless, Faces of an audience caught between anticipation and disbelief. Kennedy's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something that suggested patience, like a man waiting for the right moment to draw his sword. But still, he didn't speak. The suspense was maddening. Jill's confidence swelled. Silence, after all, is often mistaken for surrender. She leaned forward, her tone dripping with finality, determined to land the insult that would leave Kennedy no way out. "Your words might have carried weight decades ago," she said, lowering her voice just enough to draw the audience in. "But today they're nothing more than echoes in an empty chamber. The world has moved on, Senator. Maybe it's time you did too." The blow was complete. The room gasped, reporters' pens scratched, and every spectator felt the weight of the insult settle into the air. Jill Biden stepped back slightly, satisfied, her expression one of triumph. She had gone for the jugular, and she believed she had landed the strike cleanly. But across the room, John Kennedy remained a study in composure. Not a word, not a twitch, just steady, unshaken silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't signal defeat. It signaled calculation. The audience could feel it now, even if Jill couldn't. Something was stirring beneath that calm surface. Kennedy wasn't ignoring her words. He was absorbing them, filing them away, and sharpening them into a weapon of his own. The clock was ticking. The stage was set. And though Jill Biden believed she had taken control of the room, what no one realized yet was that the silence wasn't her victory. It was Kennedy's trap. The weight of Jill Biden's words still lingered in the hall, thick as smoke after a cannon's fire. The audience, caught between shock and anticipation, leaned forward in their seats. Everyone was waiting for Kennedy's reply, yet the senator sat motionless, his silence stretching longer and longer until it began to feel like part of the performance itself. Kennedy's face betrayed nothing. His hands rested lightly on the table before him, fingers interlaced, posture loose but steady. To the untrained eye, he looked almost detached, but those who knew him well recognized the signs. The faint narrowing of his eyes, the measured breath, the quiet patience of a man who understood that timing could be more devastating than volume. Reporters exchanged nervous glances. Camera crews whispered frantic directions, zooming tighter on Kennedy's face, desperate to catch the flicker of expression that might hint at his thoughts. But all they saw was stillness. For Jill Biden, that stillness felt like victory. She stood taller at the podium, feeding off the silence, believing she had cornered the veteran senator into submission. Her confidence was visible, her voice gaining an edge of triumph as she continued to circle him with her words like a predator circling prey. But beneath Kennedy's calm exterior, another story was unfolding. His mind, sharp as a blade honed over decades, was already at work. He had faced challenges far greater than this: cutthroat Senate debates, courtroom battles where reputations and livelihoods hung in the balance, confrontations where a single misplaced word could cost everything. He had learned that the strongest voice in the room wasn't always the loudest. It was the one that waited, measured, and struck at the exact moment when the opponent least expected it. As Jill pressed on, Kennedy's memory flickered with images from his long career, long nights poring over case files, bitter fights on the Senate floor, the countless times he had been underestimated because of his southern drawl and folksy charm. They thought he was easy to mock. They thought he was too slow, too old-fashioned. But time and again he had proven them wrong. And tonight would be no different. The audience felt it too. The tension in the hall was no longer driven solely by Jill's words. It was shifting toward Kennedy's silence. Every second he refused to respond made the crowd lean in closer, made the cameras press tighter. Jill's remarks were still echoing, but now people weren't watching her anymore. Their eyes were locked on Kennedy, on the quiet figure who seemed to be drawing all the energy in the room toward himself. Jill noticed the shift, though she misread it. She assumed the crowd was eager for her to land the finishing blow, to humiliate Kennedy once and for all. She pressed harder, her words coming quicker now, her tone sharpened to a point. But Kennedy knew better. He understood that anticipation was a weapon. The longer he held his silence, the heavier it became, until even Jill's most biting insults began to feel like noise rattling in the air. He reached forward, adjusting the microphone ever so slightly. The small motion sent a ripple through the audience. Reporters froze, pens poised. Jill hesitated, her rhythm breaking for the briefest instant. Kennedy did not speak yet. He simply looked up, his eyes locking with Jill's across the stage. In that moment, the entire hall seemed to still. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room, leaving only suspense. The storm hadn't broken yet, but everyone could feel it coming. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Every tick of the clock echoed like thunder in the still hall. Jill Biden, emboldened by what she thought was Kennedy's hesitation, straightened her back and adjusted the microphone once more. Her lips curved into a small, confident smile. "See?" she said, her tone smooth but laced with arrogance. "Nothing to say. Maybe that's the problem, Senator Kennedy. Maybe your silence is proof that you simply have nothing left to offer." The words hung heavy in the air, but this time the room did not erupt with whispers or applause. Instead, all eyes turned back to Kennedy. The veteran senator finally shifted in his chair. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. The movement alone sent a jolt through the audience. Reporters leaned forward. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Jill blinked, her confidence wavering just slightly, but she forced her expression to remain composed. Kennedy walked to the podium with the kind of unhurried grace that only a man completely in control could possess. He adjusted his jacket, placed both hands firmly on either side of the podium, and leaned into the microphone. His gaze swept across the crowd before finally resting on Jill Biden. And then, in a voice calm and steady, but edged with razor-sharp wit, he delivered the line. "I may be old-fashioned, Jill," he said slowly, each word striking with precision. "But at least I don't need my husband's job to make people pretend I matter." For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Absolute silence. Even the cameras stopped clicking, as if stunned by the weight of his words. Jill's confident smile froze, her eyes widening just slightly. And then, chaos. The audience erupted, gasps and shouts mixing with waves of laughter and thunderous applause. The hall shook with energy, the kind that no script, no preparation could ever create. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their pens flying across notepads, their phones lighting up with breaking alerts. Social media exploded almost instantly. Within seconds, hashtags began trending. Kennedy crushes Jill. One line shut down. Senator strikes back. Jill tried to recover, her mouth opening as if to respond, but no sound came out. The sting of Kennedy's words was too sharp, too direct. The insult wasn't just political. It was personal. And the crowd knew it. Kennedy, however, didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or soak in the applause. He simply stood there, calm and composed, waiting for the noise to subside. His expression remained steady, almost serene, as if this was exactly how he had planned it. For Jill, the silence had been her weapon, but now, Kennedy had turned it into his victory. When the crowd finally quieted, Kennedy leaned once more into the microphone. "Experience doesn't go out of style," he said, his tone even softer now but still commanding. "Respect does." The applause roared back to life, louder, stronger, more unified than before. Kennedy stepped back from the podium, his one-liner echoing in the minds of everyone present. Jill Biden stood frozen, visibly shaken, her earlier confidence replaced by the unmistakable look of someone who had underestimated her opponent. The nation had just witnessed it. A single line, delivered with perfect timing, had shifted the balance of power in the room, and John Kennedy knew it. The echoes of Kennedy's one-liner still rang through the hall like a bell that refused to stop vibrating. The audience, electrified, couldn't contain themselves. Some were on their feet, clapping and cheering, while others sat stunned, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Jill Biden, however, stood rigid at the podium, her knuckles whitening as she gripped its edges. For the first time that evening, her smile faltered. She had walked into the room certain of her ability to control the narrative, but Kennedy's words had pierced deeper than she'd anticipated. The sting wasn't just personal, it was public. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had felt it. But Jill Biden was no stranger to pressure. She had lived in the glare of the spotlight for years, and she knew that retreat would be fatal. Slowly, she drew a steadying breath, lifted her chin, and forced her voice to steady. "Senator," she began, the faintest tremor betraying her. "Effort. Cheap shots might win you applause in the moment, but they don't solve problems. The truth is, America doesn't need clever comebacks. It needs vision. It needs progress. And progress doesn't come from clinging to the past, it comes from leaders bold enough to look forward." The audience quieted again. Some nodded, giving Jill a respectful chance to recover. Her tone sharpened as she pressed on. "We can't keep building on the same crumbling foundation and expect different results," she continued. "The world is changing. Technology, society, the challenges we face. Experience matters, yes, but not when it's used as an excuse to resist change. What this country needs is the courage to break away from outdated thinking and embrace new solutions." Her words carried fire, her delivery polished, but the damage lingered. Kennedy, still standing at his podium, waited patiently. He didn't rush to interrupt. Instead, he let her finish, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with her rising urgency. When Jill's voice finally trailed off, Kennedy leaned toward the microphone once more. His tone was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority, forcing the room back into silence. "Vision without wisdom is like a ship without a compass," he said. "It doesn't matter how bold you are if you don't know where you're going. Progress isn't about burning the map, it's about knowing how to read it." The words landed with a heavy finality. The audience reacted with another wave of applause, louder this time, echoing off the chamber walls. Kennedy straightened his posture, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Jill again. "You speak of change as if it's always a virtue," he continued. "But real progress isn't about tearing everything down to start from scratch. It's about respecting what's worked, fixing what's broken, and leaving behind something stronger for the next generation. You can't throw away the lessons of history and call it leadership. That's not courage, that's chaos." The hall erupted again, cheers mixing with whistles, as though Kennedy's words had unlocked something the audience had been waiting to hear. Jill stiffened, her expression tightening, but she refused to back down. "This country doesn't need the past to guide it," she shot back, her voice rising above the noise. "It needs leaders brave enough to leave the past behind." Kennedy's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that wasn't mocking but unshakably certain. "And yet," he replied softly, "here we are, debating in a hall built on the very foundations you'd rather forget." The clash was no longer just personal. It had become ideological, youthful progressivism against seasoned experience. Every exchange was more than words. It was a battle for the soul of leadership itself. The crowd, the cameras, the nation, they were no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to a moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered for years to come. And John Kennedy, calm as ever, showed no sign of yielding ground. The hall was no longer Jill Biden's arena. The energy that had once fueled her sharp remarks now pulsed in Kennedy's favor. Every word he spoke seemed to echo louder, land harder, and stick deeper. Jill, who had entered the night with unwavering confidence, suddenly found herself scrambling to reclaim footing on ground that was slipping away beneath her. She straightened her papers again, her voice quickening as she tried to redirect the debate. "Senator Kennedy," she said, her tone sharpened, "if all we ever do is hold on to the past, then we'll never move forward. The world doesn't wait for experience. It demands change now." Her words were bold, but her delivery carried a thinness, a faint edge of defensiveness. The audience caught it instantly. They weren't leaning in with curiosity anymore. They were watching her struggle, and it showed. Kennedy didn't need to raise his voice. He simply adjusted the microphone again, his tone calm, steady, dripping with the kind of authority that only comes from decades of standing in the fire and never flinching. "Mrs. Biden," he said evenly, "the world doesn't wait for inexperience, either. Change without wisdom is just noise, and America has enough noise already." The line detonated like a thunderclap. The audience roared, the sound shaking the chamber walls. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, headlines already forming. Kennedy dismantles Jill with calm precision. Jill blinked, her jaw tightening, the applause swallowing her next words before they could leave her lips. She forced a smile, but the crack in her composure was visible now, a tiny fracture spreading beneath the pressure of Kennedy's quiet dominance. The crowd was with him. Kennedy could feel it. He had shifted the balance. What began as a battle of words had become something larger, a symbolic struggle between eras. Jill represented the polished, modern establishment voice, eager to claim progress through urgency. Kennedy embodied the seasoned defender of tradition, the reminder that experience was not an anchor but a foundation. As the applause ebbed, Kennedy leaned back slightly, his voice carrying a touch of humor. "You can call me old-fashioned," he said with a faint smile, "but I'd rather be old-fashioned than short-sighted." The audience erupted again, this time with laughter mixed into the applause, the kind that signals not just agreement, but delight. Jill's lips parted as if to fire back, but she hesitated, the pause betraying her frustration. And beyond the walls of the hall, the nation was already reacting. Social media feeds lit up in real time. Kennedy crushes, Jill climbed, the trending charts. Clips of his one-liners spread across platforms. Captions screaming, "Experience speaks louder than insults." Commentators on live broadcasts shook their heads in disbelief, calling it one of the sharpest political shutdowns in recent memory. Back in the room, Jill tried once more to pivot. "The future isn't built by repeating the same mistakes," she pressed, her voice sharper now, trying to cut through the noise. But Kennedy didn't flinch. His reply was measured, surgical. "The future isn't built by ignoring the lessons that prevent those mistakes either." The chamber fell into thunderous applause once again. Jill lowered her gaze briefly, gripping the podium tighter as the reality settled in. This wasn't her night. For John Kennedy, it wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about landing the hardest insult. It was about showing the nation that calm, authority sharpened by experience, could silence even the most calculated of attacks. The power in the room had changed hands. And everyone, Jill, the audience, the media, and the millions watching at home, knew it. The applause didn't fade quickly this time. It thundered, rolling across the chamber like waves crashing against stone. The crowd was no longer simply reacting. They were celebrating. John Kennedy had turned what began as an insult into a national moment of triumph. Jill Biden, still standing at the podium, forced her features into composure, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She had lost the room for Kennedy. The victory wasn't in the noise of the crowd. It was in the silence that followed. When the clapping finally subsided, there was no mistaking the shift. He had reclaimed not just his dignity, but the authority of wisdom in a world obsessed with quick words and flashy gestures. He leaned back from the microphone, calm as ever, and returned to his seat with the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to prove anything more. Jill Biden gathered her notes, her jaw tight, her gaze flicking down at the pages as if they could offer her an escape. She had come prepared with statistics, with rehearsed lines, with polished rhetoric. But what she hadn't prepared for was the power of a single well-timed sentence. Kennedy hadn't just answered her insult. He had redefined the entire conversation. The time the event ended, the narrative had already escaped the room. On television, anchors replayed Kennedy's one-liner on loop, their voices dripping with awe. On Twitter, hashtags like Kennedy Victory and Experience Matters trended at lightning speed. Commentators across the political spectrum debated the meaning of the moment. But even Kennedy's harshest critics admitted he had dominated the exchange. For many, it wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about something larger. Kennedy's victory had become symbolic. It was a reminder that wisdom wasn't a relic of the past, but a weapon forged through decades of service, sharpened in countless battles, and wielded with precision when the moment demanded it. Jill Biden's team worked quickly, issuing statements to shift the focus back to her message of progress and forward vision, but the damage was done. The clip of Kennedy's retort had gone viral, and no amount of spin could erase the image of Jill standing silent, caught off guard, while the crowd roared for her opponent. Meanwhile, Kennedy returned to his office later. That evening, the noise of the chamber behind him, the media storm raging outside. He removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and sank into the leather chair behind his desk. For a moment, he allowed himself a quiet smile. He had been through tougher fights, more dangerous political wars, but this moment carried a special kind of satisfaction. Not because he had humiliated the First Lady, but because he had reminded the nation of something too often forgotten. Experience still mattered. As he reflected, Kennedy thought of the younger politicians who dismissed him, who sneered at his slow drawl and old-fashioned ways. Tonight had shown them that experience wasn't dead weight, it was ballast, the kind that kept the ship steady when the waves crashed hardest. And across the nation, millions watching at home had seen it too. Parents at dinner tables, workers, in break rooms, students in dorm halls, all of them replayed the moment, sharing it, talking about it. The lesson wasn't subtle. A single line delivered with calm conviction could silence arrogance, crush insult, and remind everyone that wisdom earned over time was not weakness, it was strength. By the next morning, headlines blazed across newspapers. Kennedy's one-liner shakes the nation. Experience strikes back. The calm before the storm, and the storm that won. Jill Biden, bruised but unbroken, would move forward with her message. But she would carry the scar of that night, the memory of being outmaneuvered by a man many had underestimated. John Kennedy, however, needed no spotlight. He had made his point and done it without theatrics. His one-liner would live on, not as a viral soundbite alone, but as a testament. In the battle between mockery and wisdom, it is wisdom that endures. And as the nation buzzed, Kennedy carried on as he always had, steady, grounded, and quietly certain that sometimes the sharpest blade was not a sword raised in anger, but a single sentence, delivered at exactly the right time.